I'm honored to have this opportunity to have a chat with you.
Well, thank you.
Hey, you know what? I just wanted to ask you first, and this has, it has nothing to do with Bones of Crows, the movie
Right?
itself, but I want to get into your origin story just a little bit because you have a fascinating story. I know you've worked with, the who's who in Hollywood. Now,
hmm
how did that happen?
It was in 1995. I was graduating from my marketing management in Grand Prairie, Alberta, of all places. And they had the 1995 Canada Winter Games, and they wanted a young man to stand on stage when the elder did the opening prayer. And it was the first time they had it ever filmed live. And then, as the opening ceremonies were happening and the camera was panning as the elder was doing the opening prayer, and when it hit me, a producer out of Toronto just happened to be channel surfing looking for this warrior for this film. They were shooting with the late David Bowie and Harvey Keitel in Italy. And the camera hit me and he said, okay, and hunted me down and then sent in my photos. One thing led to another. The next thing I know, I'm in Italy with Harvey Keitel and the late David Bowie shooting my first spaghetti western, and
That's amazing.
that's just yeah.
That's
So
like
yeah,
a that's like a Judy Garland, Vivian Lee kind of story where you're just discovered.
yeah, yeah. No,
I'm
and it's been an interesting journey since then, right? So yeah,
Yeah, and what is fascinating about this journey is, and I'll let you elaborate, you're in the
hmm
machine, you're in the Hollywood machine, you're getting gigs, actively getting
yeah.
gigs, and you're making a reasonable living, and you decide to pull out of that. Why?
Because in my community, there were two residential schools. There was an Anglican and a Catholic residential school.
Yeah.
And the world is starting to realize the impact residential schools have had on my people and the communities. So I experienced emotional, mental, physical, sexual abuse as a child because of intergenerational impact. And and I never dealt with that unresolved childhood trauma the time I was working with Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And I was called by my ancestors in 2009. He said, your work there is done for now. You will walk away from what you have come to know as society, and you will go reconnect and heal from your childhood trauma because there's work for you to do now that you walk that part of life. And here I am. So for the 6 years, I had to go heal from that childhood trauma. Now I know why, because since then, Bones of Crows has come,
Mm-hmm.
Lost Space has come. I've worked with and is celebrating our indigenous culture, language, and spirituality.
Just harkening back to when you had that epiphany, that
Mm-hmm.
moment where it occurred to you, you have to get back to engaging with your community again. You said you got the call. Obviously, it's not just a long distance phone call to Los Angeles. How did that appear to you in that moment? Was it just
I was in I was in a recording studio. I was doing ADR
hmm
for audio digital for one of my projects. And I wasn't in a good space emotionally and mentally, physically, because I was engaging in unhealthy patterns and behaviors. And I'm in doing that ADR, and the ancestors that I've come to know, I could hear this sense saying, you are done, you are done now. You will walk away from everything. And that's, you call it your intuition, your intuitive. But now that I know, so now that I practice and sit in ceremony and I had to reconnect, now I know those were the ancestors. And the world doesn't understand. Sometimes when you get these thoughts and the intuition kicks in, that's the other side. That's the ancestors. That's the spirit realm communicating. Not with everybody, but there are those of us who made that connection, right? So,
in
and that was
channeling?
it. Yeah.
Well, and it's fascinating that you're such a profoundly well-known character, and to be able to
Mm-hmm.
be chosen to channel what you see as
Mm-hmm.
communication with your ancestry. And
Hmm.
this ties in with the theme of kind of what's going on with Stardale this coming weekend as part of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And that is reconnection and reconciliation and resilience. Now, I think of the protagonist in the movie Bones of Crows, Aline Spears. She's the lead character, and she has to really find her inner resolve to set an example for future generations. Now, there's a corollary between the character and you
Hmm.
personally, in that
Hmm.
you're somebody who's had to do the same thing. Is it overwhelming on occasion, feeling that responsibility to kind of that you're engendered with this kind of power?
Yeah, you know what? Before, when I was the national native role model for Canada in 96, 97, that was kind of the introduction to answering this calling, which I didn't know then
Mm-hmm.
for what it is now. And it was overwhelming initially. I went through my trials, my tribulations,
Yeah.
my blessings, and understanding the calling. But ever since I left my sabbatical in 2015, and my whole perception in terms of how I look at life, how I look at Hollywood, and how I look at life in general is it's shifted. I now look at the world through a spiritual lens, that everything happens for a reason, and people, places, and things are put on our path to teach us about us and to teach us about life. And when the offer came for Bones of Crows, when I knew it was an indigenous female director,
Mm-hmm.
I accepted the offer right away because part of when I was giving my marching orders in 2015 from the elders and the ancestors, and my late grandmother had told me on her deathbed that she spoke of this time where the woman would rise in the world. And my role and responsibility was to stand with with a woman in her good times and her bad times. So I accepted the offer without even understanding who Chief Wandering Spirit was until after the fact. But
Right,
and that's what I
right.
see when I say I look at the world from through a spiritual lens. It's I trust my intuition and I trust my third eye and I trust that part of who I am as a four directional human being because I don't use a term indigenous because that's a colonial term and I can't talk to my people about decolonization while I use colonial terms
Right.
and
Yeah,
that to
exactly.
be able to express the power and sacredness of my ancestors, of my heritage, my culture, my language, my spirituality, right? So,
And you're revisiting Bones of Crows again as the screening happens this coming weekend in Calgary. You're doing a Q&A with George Canyon following the
mhm.
screening. What kind of questions do people ask you much of the time?
Well, when we did the first screening of Bones, when it went national in the theaters, I think it was back in June, and I did the Q&A at the Eau Claire Market Cinema
Hmm.
here in Calgary, and when I asked the people any questions, any answers, there was nothing. You could hear a pin drop because the people that were in the audience, they were so overwhelmed with grief, with loss, anger, frustration. And these were my Western brothers and sisters. It was only until I shut down the Q&A that they all started lining up to talk to me personally, one on one.
Right, right.
And I realized that the reason why they couldn't speak after the credits rolled. And it was when I had an 80-year-old Western brother come up to me with his wife and I put my hand out to greet him. He put his hand out and he started hyperventilating. He couldn't speak. He literally, and he broke down. He started crying.
Huh.
So I just took him in my arms and I gave him a hug and I said, "Thank you for being here." And after they were able to regain their composure, they said to me, "I am so ashamed of my ancestors. I am so ashamed of what they've done to your people. What can I do to redeem myself, my ancestors?" And they said, "You've done it already by being here, by opening your mind and your heart to come and view and see the film." To me, that's where it needs to begin, is when the people can open their minds and their hearts to understanding the true reality of what the residential schools did to my four directional people.
Well, thanks for embracing your brothers of all kinds, and just taking this journey and allowing us to take this journey along with you, which is profoundly spiritual and incredibly moving. And we look forward to seeing the film and folks participating in the Q&A afterwards, or at least, lining up for a hug. And thank you for sharing your gifts with, well, not only Calgary this weekend, but the world. You're an extremely talented fellow. If you could play any role, what would be your dream gig?
What would be my dream gig? Which it's actually, I've been offered a role coming out of Scotland, and the project right now, the working title is called Firebirds, and they've offered me to be one of the leads. And this character is a role of a chief who is speaking for his people, who is wanting to remind his people that the power of the language, the power of culture, and the power of spirituality.
Thanks a lot, Gerald Auger, for taking the time to chat with us this afternoon. Absolutely brilliant. We look forward to Bones of Crows screening in Calgary this weekend. And I'll go out just by asking you, can I play a request for you from the ckua library?
If you have any Buffy Sainte Marie,
Absolutely.
she has be a Buffy Sainte Marie, and because she's been a pioneer for our people for a long time, and it's to honor the matriarchs of the world and all matriarchs. And if you could do that, I would dance at your next wedding, brother.
Okay. That's great. I'll get to Buffy Sainte Marie for sure. Well, it's been an honor, and thank you so much for taking the time. And the Cree word for grandmother.
It's cool.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. I know you're a busy fellow.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for the opportunity, and onward and upward is all I can say. So it's a new world emerging.
It is.
And we all need to come together, as what Gandhi said, there's only one race in life, and that's the human race.
It's been an honor.
Thank you, brother.
Keep well.
Okay, you too.
Take care.